A silent conversation between a housekeeper and a child brought a millionaire's world crashing down. Vincent Calloway, a man who built skyscrapers that touched the clouds and commanded respect in every boardroom he entered, found himself paralyzed in the doorway of his own mansion, watching something he never thought possible. Why did the sight of his mute son laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in years fill him not with relief, but with soul-crushing dread? The answer lies buried in a tragedy 20 years old, a promise he broke, and a woman whose death he could have prevented. This is the story of how the past never stays buried, and how sometimes the people we fail to save come back to save us. The Calloway mansion rose from the hills of Riverside Heights like a crystal cathedral, all glass and steel and impossible angles. It was Vincent's masterpiece, designed by his own hand, a monument to what happened when raw ambition met architectural genius. The house had been featured in a dozen magazines, praised for its innovative use of natural light and sustainable materials. What those magazines never mentioned was how empty it felt inside. Vincent Calloway moved through the sprawling corridors of his home with the efficient detachment of a hotel guest passing through a lobby. At 43, he carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who'd learned early that showing weakness was showing failure. His dark hair was threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, and his custom-tailored charcoal suit fit him like armor. Even at 9 in the evening, after 14 hours of meetings, his tie was still perfectly knotted. He'd just returned from securing the financing for the Meridian Tower project, a 70-story mixed-use development that would reshape the downtown skyline. It was the kind of deal that should have left him energized, triumphant. Instead, he felt nothing but the familiar hollow ache that no amount of success ever seemed to fill. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh flowers, the work of his housekeeping staff, who maintained the pristine emptiness with invisible efficiency. Vincent headed toward his home office, already mentally reviewing the contracts his legal team would need to prepare, when a sound stopped him cold. Laughter. Pure, unguarded, childlike laughter echoing from somewhere deeper in the house. His son's laughter. Vincent's briefcase slipped from his fingers and hit the marble floor with a sharp crack that he barely registered. 8-year-old Cameron had been selectively mute for nearly 4 years, ever since the accident that had also taken his mother. The boy could physically speak, every specialist had confirmed it, but something inside him had locked the words away behind an impenetrable wall of silence and grief. Vincent had thrown money at the problem with the desperation of a man who believed everything had a price. Child psychiatrists from Johns Hopkins. Specialists from the Mayo Clinic. An experimental therapy program in Switzerland that cost more than most people earned in a year. Nothing worked. Cameron existed in his bubble of silence, his gray eyes watching the world with an unsettling awareness but never truly participating in it. The sound of his laughter was impossible. It was like hearing a ghost speak. Vincent followed the sound through the house, his heart hammering against his ribs. The laughter was coming from the garden room, the glass-enclosed conservatory that overlooked the infinity pool and the city lights beyond. He moved quietly, some instinct making him want to observe before being observed. What he saw through the French doors made the world tilt on its axis. Cameron sat cross-legged on the polished wooden floor, surrounded by potted ferns and orchids. His whole face was transformed, animated in a way Vincent hadn't seen since before the accident. His small hands were moving in rapid, deliberate patterns that Vincent didn't immediately recognize. Across from him, mirroring his gestures with her own hands, was Isabel Chen, Vincent's housekeeper. The quiet, efficient woman he'd hired 7 months ago through an agency. She was perhaps 38 or 40, with elegant features and dark hair pulled back in a simple twist. She wore the same modest gray uniform she always did, but in this moment, bathed in the warm glow of the garden lights, she looked entirely different. She looked radiant. Her hands moved with fluid grace, forming shapes and patterns in response to Cameron's gestures. They were having a conversation. A real, animated, joyful conversation without a single spoken word. Sign language. Vincent's breath caught in his throat as recognition slammed into him like a physical force. He knew sign language. He'd learned it years ago, in another lifetime, from another person. And watching Isabel's hands form those specific shapes, that particular dialect of American Sign Language, was like watching a ghost reach through 20 years and grab him by the throat. Cameron's fingers spelled something out slowly, and Isabel responded with a smile that lit up her entire face. Then Cameron did something Vincent hadn't seen in 4 years. He threw his head back and laughed with pure, unself-conscious joy, the sound filling the conservatory like music. Vincent's hand found the door frame. He gripped it hard enough that his knuckles went white. The logical part of his brain, the part that had built an empire on cold calculation, registered what he was seeing: his son communicating. His son happy. His son emerging from the prison of silence that had held him captive. It should have been a miracle. It should have filled him with overwhelming gratitude and relief. Instead, ice water flooded his veins, and his vision narrowed to a pinpoint focused on Isabel Chen's hands. Because he recognized more than just the language. He recognized the specific way she formed certain signs, the slight flourish on the letter C, the graceful arc of her gesture for happy, the precise angle of her hand when signing mother. He'd seen those exact movements before, performed by someone else. Someone who'd taught him sign language in a cramped studio apartment that smelled of jasmine tea and old books. Someone who died because of his silence. The door creaked as Vincent pushed it open. Both Cameron and Isabel looked up, startled. The joy drained from Cameron's face, replaced by the familiar weariness that always appeared when his father entered a room. Isabel rose smoothly to her feet, her professional composure sliding back into place like a mask. "Mr. Calloway," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I apologize. I didn't realize you'd returned home. Cameron and I were just finishing our evening session." "Session?" Vincent's voice came out rougher than he intended, stripped of its usual controlled authority. "Yes, sir." Isabel smoothed her uniform, a nervous gesture she probably didn't realize she was making. "I've been teaching Cameron sign language. I should have requested your permission first, I know, but he seemed so isolated, and I thought," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "I thought if he had a way to communicate that felt safe to him, it might help." Vincent stared at her, really looked at her for the first time since he'd hired her. He'd barely interacted with Isabel in the 7 months she'd worked for him. She was part of the invisible machinery that kept his life running. Meals appeared when he needed them, his clothes were cleaned and pressed, the house maintained its museum-like perfection. He'd hired her through an agency, approved her based on references and background checks he'd never personally reviewed, and then promptly forgot about her existence. Now he couldn't stop looking at her. Searching her face for traces of something, someone, from his past. "Where did you learn sign language?" The question came out sharper than he intended, almost accusatory. Isabel's expression flickered with confusion. "I grew up with it, Mr. Calloway. My mother was deaf, so ASL was my first language, actually. I spoke with my hands before I spoke with my voice." "Your mother." Vincent took a step into the conservatory, and something in his intensity made Isabel instinctively move between him and Cameron. Protective. "What was her name?" The question clearly caught her off guard. Why does that matter, sir?" "Just answer the question." His voice cracked like a whip, and he saw Cameron flinch. Isabel's chin lifted slightly, a subtle show of defiance beneath her professional deference. "Her name was Maid Chen. She passed away when I was a baby. I was raised by my foster mother, Rosa Delgado, from the time I was 18 months old until I was 4. Rosa was deaf too. She's the one who really taught me sign language. She's the mother I remember." The name hit Vincent like a physical blow. Rosa. God, Rosa. The room spun. Vincent grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "Mr. Calloway?" Isabel's concern was immediate and genuine. "Are you all right? You've gone completely pale." He wasn't all right. He was drowning in a past he'd sealed away, in guilt he'd paved over with steel and glass and success. Because he knew that name. He knew that woman. And if this was the daughter Rosa had been raising, if this was the little girl he remembered coloring in corner booths while her foster mother worked the late shift, then his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. "How long have you been teaching him?" Vincent managed, trying to regain his composure. 3 months, sir." Isabel's voice remained steady, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "I started slowly, just basic signs during our afternoon time together." Cameron took to it immediately. "He's exceptionally bright, Mr. Calloway. He has a natural gift for language." 3 months. For 3 months, his son had been learning a new language, finding a voice, building a connection with another human being, and Vincent had been too consumed with his projects and his empire building to notice. The guilt was familiar. It always was. "Show me," he said quietly. "Show me what you've taught him." Isabel glanced at Cameron, who was watching the exchange with those two knowing gray eyes. She knelt back down to his level and signed slowly, speaking aloud as she did, "Cameron, can you introduce yourself to your father?" Cameron's small hands moved with surprising confidence. "My name is Cameron Calloway." "How old are you?" "I am 8 years old." "What do you like to do?" Cameron paused, then his fingers formed careful shapes. "I like to draw buildings. And I like learning to talk with my hands. And I like Isabel's stories." Each gesture was perfect, precise, beautiful. Vincent felt something crack open in his chest, a fissure in the armor he'd built around his heart. "He's progressing remarkably fast," Isabel said softly, pride evident in her voice despite the tension of the moment. "He learns new signs almost immediately and retains them perfectly. I've never seen a child pick it up so quickly." "What stories?" Vincent heard himself ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabel's expression softened. "Oh, I tell him about my childhood sometimes. About Rosa, how she taught me to see the world differently. How she showed me that silence doesn't mean emptiness, that there are so many ways to communicate beyond spoken words." She smiled at Cameron with genuine warmth. "He reminds me of her, actually. That same watchful intelligence, that same careful way of observing everything before deciding how to respond." The crack in Vincent's chest widened into a chasm. He couldn't breathe. The conservatory suddenly felt airless, the walls pressing in. "Rosa Delgado," he said, and it wasn't a question. Isabel's eyes widened. "How do you know that name?" Vincent couldn't answer. His throat had closed completely. Because the little girl he remembered, 4 years old, with Rosa's eyes and a gap-toothed smile, was standing in front of him now, 35 years old and unknowingly caring for his son. "Mr. Calloway." Isabel's voice had changed, sharp with sudden suspicion. "How do you know Rosa's name?" Cameron was looking between them, confused and frightened by the sudden tension crackling through the air. Vincent started, but the words wouldn't come. 20 years of carefully constructed walls were crumbling, and he had no idea how to stop it. Isabel took a step toward him, her eyes searching his face with new intensity. "Tell me. How do you know who Rosa was?" The conservatory door felt very far away. Vincent wanted to run, to retreat to his study and lock the door and pretend this conversation had never happened. But Isabel's gaze held him pinned like a specimen under glass. "I knew her," Vincent finally said, the words barely audible. "A long time ago. We were friends." "Friends." Isabel repeated the word slowly, testing it. Then her hand moved to her collar, pulling out a delicate silver chain that had been hidden beneath her uniform. On the end of it hung a small pendant, a hummingbird with its wings spread in eternal flight. Vincent's vision blurred. He'd been with Rosa when she bought that necklace. He'd helped her pick it out. "Rosa died 20 years ago," Isabel said, her voice steady but her hand trembling slightly as she held the pendant. "She died in a fire. A building fire during a demolition project in San Francisco. The company responsible was web development." Vincent's world narrowed to a single point. He couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. "You worked for web development," Isabel continued, her voice gaining strength as pieces clicked into place in her mind. "Your company bio says you got your start there. That you worked on urban revitalization projects in San Francisco in the early 2000s. She took another step toward him, and Vincent saw the moment recognition and understanding flooded her eyes. Saw the exact second she made the connection she'd been unconsciously avoiding. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew about the demolition. You knew Rosa lived in that building." "Isabel," Vincent started, but she cut him off. "You were her friend, and you knew they were going to demolish that building, and you said nothing. You did nothing." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from that long-ago fire. Vincent wanted to deny it. Wanted to explain, to defend himself, to make her understand how young he'd been, how powerless he'd felt, how complicated it had all been. But looking at her face, seeing Rosa's daughter standing before him, seeing the little girl he'd abandoned to the foster system, seeing the woman who'd survived everything and still had enough kindness left to teach his son, he couldn't lie. "Yes," he said. "I knew." The word fell between them like a stone into still water, and Vincent watched the ripples of its impact spread across Isabel's face. Shock. Disbelief. Understanding. And finally, a cold fury that made her look more like Rosa than ever. "Get out," she said quietly. "Isabel, please, let me explain. Get out of this room. Now." Her voice was steel. "You don't get to be here. Not with him. Not after." She looked at Cameron, who was watching them with wide, frightened eyes, and seemed to remember herself. "Not now. Not like this." Vincent nodded stiffly and turned toward the door. As he left, he heard Isabel's voice behind him, gentle again as she knelt beside Cameron and began signing to him, her hands moving in the graceful patterns Rosa had taught her so long ago. The patterns Vincent had learned from Rosa too, in another lifetime, before his silence had killed her. Scene 1, The Sleepless Night, Vincent's study, 2:47 a.m. Vincent sat in the darkness of his study, the city lights casting geometric shadows across the mahogany desk. He hadn't turned on the lamps. The darkness felt appropriate, a physical manifestation of the pit opening beneath his carefully constructed life. His hands trembled as he pulled up Isabel's employment file on his computer screen. The blue glow illuminated his haggard face as he scrolled through information he should have examined 7 months ago. Isabel Chen. Born in San Francisco. Mother, Maylin Chen, deceased. Father, unknown. The foster care records were sparse, a series of placements between ages 4 and 18, each one lasting anywhere from 3 months to 2 years. No adoption. No permanent family. Vincent clicked deeper into the background check his agency had performed. There was a scanned copy of her high school diploma, a few letters of recommendation from previous employers praising her reliability and gentleness with children, a spotless credit report showing modest income and zero debt. And there, buried in the supplementary documents, was a single photograph from her application. Not the professional headshot used for her employee ID, but a candid shot she'd submitted showing her volunteer work. She stood in what looked like a community center, surrounded by a group of children. Her hands were frozen mid-sign, teaching them the alphabet in ASL. Around her neck, clearly visible, was the hummingbird pendant. Vincent enlarged the image until the pendant filled his screen. The delicate silver bird with its wings spread wide, caught in perpetual flight toward an unreachable sky. He remembered the day Rosa bought it. They'd been walking through a street fair in the Mission District, Rosa pushing 4-year-old Isabel in a second-hand stroller. Rosa had stopped at a jewelry vendor's table, drawn to the hummingbird. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about hummingbirds," Rosa had said, her hands moving as she spoke. "In our culture, they represent the souls of warriors. They're so small, but they have the strongest hearts. They can fly backwards, forwards, hover in one place. They adapt to survive." She'd bought the necklace with money Vincent knew she couldn't afford to spend. When he'd protested, she'd smiled and said, "Some things are worth more than their price, Vincent. This reminds me that strength doesn't always look like what people expect." A week later, Vincent had accepted the job with web development. A month after that, he'd seen the demolition plans. 2 months later, Rosa was dead. A soft knock on the study door jolted Vincent from his memories. His heart hammered as he quickly closed the file on his screen. "Mr. Calloway?" Isabel's voice came through the door, steady but formal. "I know it's late, but we need to talk. Now." Vincent rose on unsteady legs and opened the door. Isabel stood in the hallway, no longer in her uniform. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger this way, and the resemblance to Rosa was even more striking. "I've put Cameron to bed," she said without preamble. "He's confused about what happened tonight, but I told him everything was fine. We both know that's a lie." She walked past him into the study without waiting for an invitation. Vincent followed, closing the door behind them. Isabel moved to the windows, looking out at the sprawling city below. "After you left the conservatory, I started thinking. Really thinking about the coincidences that brought me here." She turned to face him, her arms crossed. 7 months ago, I was working at the Grandview nursing facility. Decent job, decent pay, but no real future. Then one day, I got a call from Premier Domestic Services saying they had a position that might interest me. A live-in housekeeper position for a prominent family. The pay was nearly double what I was making. Vincent's stomach dropped. He knew where this was going. "I didn't apply to Premier," Isabel continued. "They contacted me. They said my name had been referred to them by someone who'd seen my work and thought I'd be perfect for this specific position. When I asked who made the referral, they said it was confidential. Client privacy." She took a step toward him. "I needed the money. My apartment rent was being raised, and I couldn't afford to stay there much longer. So I didn't ask too many questions. I took the interview, got the job, and moved into this house to care for a mute child whose father I barely ever saw." "Isabel." "I'm not finished," she said sharply. "Tonight, after you ran away, I did something I should have done months ago. I called Premier and asked them to tell me who made the referral. They refused at first, citing privacy policies. But I pushed. I told them I had reason to believe the referral wasn't legitimate, that maybe my employer had orchestrated the whole thing." Vincent's throat constricted. "The woman I spoke to, Patricia, her name was," she finally admitted that yes, the referral had come from you. "Not directly, but through your executive assistant. You'd seen my resume in their general database and specifically requested they recruit me for this position." Isabel's eyes were hard now, glittering with anger and something worse, betrayal. "You knew who I was before you hired me. You brought Rosa's daughter into your home intentionally. Why?" Vincent sank into his desk chair, all the fight draining out of him. "I didn't know at first," he said quietly. "Not consciously. But about 8 months ago, I was reviewing charitable contributions for my foundation. We fund several organizations that work with foster youth and deaf education programs. One of the grant applications came from a community center that had a photo of their staff." He looked up at Isabel. "You were in that photo. Your name was listed as a volunteer sign language instructor. Isabel Chen, former foster youth, dedicated to helping deaf children communicate." "And you recognized me," Isabel said flatly. "I recognized the necklace first," Vincent admitted. "The hummingbird. In the photo, you were teaching a group of children, and the pendant was clearly visible. I knew that necklace. I'd been there when Rosa bought it." He ran his hands through his hair, the gesture making him look older, more broken. "I started digging. I pulled your records from the grant application, did some research. Isabel Chen, born to Mei Lin Chen, placed in foster care at 18 months when her mother died. Fostered by Rosa Delgado from 18 months to 4 years old. Then back into the system after Rosa's death." "You knew," Isabel whispered, the color draining from her face. "All this time, you knew exactly who I was." "Yes," Vincent said. "I knew." The confession hung between them like a physical thing. "Why?" Isabel demanded, her voice rising. Why bring me here? What kind of sick? She stopped, a new realization crossing her face. Cameron. This was about Cameron. Vincent nodded slowly. He's been mute for 4 years. Every therapist, every specialist, every intervention failed. He was disappearing into himself, and I didn't know how to reach him. So you thought what? That Rosa's daughter would magically fix him? No, Vincent said. I thought, he stopped, struggling to articulate the twisted logic that had driven his decision. I thought maybe someone who understood that kind of silence, that kind of trauma, might be able to connect with him. Someone who'd survived losing everything and still had enough compassion left to help others. Someone who knew sign language, Isabel added bitterly. Yes, Vincent admitted. I saw you teaching those children in the photo, using the same signs Rosa taught me. I thought maybe if Cameron learned another way to communicate, a way that didn't require speaking. You used me, Isabel said, her voice shaking now. You researched me, you manipulated an agency into recruiting me, you brought me into your home under false pretenses, all so I could be your son's free therapy because you were too guilty about my foster mother's death to face me honestly. Yes, Vincent said again. The word was becoming easier each time, like lancing a wound. Everything you're saying is true. Isabel turned away from him, her shoulders trembling. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with tears she was fighting to control. Did you ever plan to tell me? Or was I just supposed to fix your son and then disappear from your life again, just like I did 20 years ago? I don't know, Vincent said honestly. I told myself I would tell you eventually. When the time was right. When Cameron was better. But the truth is, I'm a coward. I've been a coward for 20 years. Tell me everything, Isabel said, turning back to face him. Her eyes were red but dry, her expression hard. Tell me exactly what happened the night Rosa died. No more half-truths. No more excuses. Everything. So Vincent told her. 3:30 a.m. Vincent started at the beginning. The diner where he'd met Rosa. The late-night shifts where she'd worked while little Isabel slept in a corner booth. The friendship that had formed between a cynical architecture student and an optimistic single mother who saw possibility everywhere. She was brilliant, Vincent said, his voice rough with old grief. People underestimated her because she worked as a server, because she was raising a foster daughter on her own, because she was deaf. But she had a mind like a steel trap. She was taking online courses to get her teaching credential. She had a business plan for opening a school for deaf children, a place where ASL would be the primary language, where deaf culture would be celebrated, not treated as a disability to be fixed. Isabel listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. She used to practice her lesson plans on you, Vincent continued, a ghost of a smile crossing his face at the memory. You were 4 years old, and you could already communicate in 2 complete languages. She was so proud of you. I remember some of it, Isabel said quietly. I remember her hands. I remember feeling safe. Vincent's smile faded. Then I got the job offer from web development. Harrison Webb himself interviewed me. He said he saw potential in my work, that I could be part of something revolutionary. He was developing the Mission Rise project, a massive redevelopment of the Mission District. High-rise condos, upscale retail, a complete transformation of the neighborhood. Gentrification, Isabel said flatly. We called it revitalization, Vincent said. We told ourselves we were improving the area, bringing in investment and opportunity. What we were really doing was displacing hundreds of low-income families and destroying a community that had existed for generations. He stood and moved to the window, unable to meet Isabel's eyes as he continued. The project included demolishing several older buildings, including the one where Rosa lived. Where the diner was located. Where the community center for the deaf operated. And you knew this, Isabel said. I knew from day one, Vincent confirmed. I saw the plans in my first week. I recognized the addresses. But I told myself it wasn't my problem. I was a junior architect. I had no power to change anything. And besides, the company was offering relocation assistance to displaced residents. They'd be fine, I told myself. They'd find new places to live. But you didn't tell Rosa, Isabel said. No, Vincent said. I didn't tell her. I saw her at the diner a few times after I started at Webb. She'd ask me about my new job, excited for me, proud that I was getting my big break. And I'd smile and thank her and say nothing about what was coming. He turned back to face Isabel. She found out 3 months before the demolition was scheduled. Someone from the city planning office came to the diner and served eviction notices to everyone who lived in the building. 90 days to vacate. What did she do? Isabel asked. She fought, Vincent said, and there was admiration in his voice despite everything. She organized the residents, started a petition, attended city council meetings. She tried to get historical protection for the building because it had been a community hub for decades. She called me, asked if I could look at the development plans, see if there was any way to modify the project to save at least the community center. And what did you do? Vincent's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I told her I'd try. Another lie. I never brought it up with Webb. I never advocated for changes. I never used whatever small voice I might have had to help her. Why not? Isabel demanded. If you cared about her, if you were really her friend, why didn't you at least try? Because I was terrified of losing my position, Vincent said. Webb had a reputation for firing people who caused problems. I'd seen him destroy the careers of employees who questioned his methods. And I told myself that even if I spoke up, it wouldn't change anything. The project was too far along, there was too much money invested. What difference could one junior architect make? So you chose your career over her life, Isabel said. Yes, Vincent said. I chose my career over her life. I chose comfort over courage. I chose silence over friendship. He moved back to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a file folder. The demolition was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Residents had until Monday night to be completely out. But there were complications. He opened the folder and pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping. Webb wanted to break ground on the new construction immediately. The investors were pressuring him about timelines. So he cut corners on the demolition prep. The utilities were supposed to be completely disconnected 72 hours before the demolition. Instead, they were being disconnected on a rolling basis, right up until the last minute. Isabel took the clipping from him. It was from the San Francisco Chronicle, dated 20 years ago. The headline read, "Fire Kills 2 in Mission District Buildings Scheduled for Demolition." I saw the revised timeline, Vincent continued. I knew the electrical system was being kept partially active until Monday evening to allow the final residents to pack. I knew it was a fire hazard, especially in a building that old with outdated wiring. But I said nothing. I was hoping to be assigned to the new building design team, and I didn't want to rock the boat. Isabel's hands shook as she read the article. The fire started at 9 p.m. on Monday night, she read aloud. Electrical malfunction in the basement. 2 fatalities, Rosa Delgado, age 28, and Marcus Chen, age 73. Several others injured. A 4-year-old child was rescued by firefighters. You, Vincent said. Rosa got you out first. She lowered you from a 3rd-floor window into a firefighter's arms. Then she went back for Marcus Chen, an elderly deaf man who lived on her floor. The smoke alarms were visual strobes for the deaf residents, but the building had lost power by then. Marcus didn't know the building was on fire. She saved me, Isabel whispered. She saved you, Vincent confirmed. And then she died trying to save someone else. Because that's who Rosa was. She put everyone else first. Always. Isabel set the newspaper clipping down with careful precision. What happened after? There was an investigation, Vincent said. The fire marshal determined the cause was faulty wiring combined with improper utility disconnection procedures. Web development faced lawsuits from the families and from the city. I was questioned as one of the architects on the project. What did you tell them? Vincent's voice was hollow. I told them what I knew about the building plans and the demolition timeline. But I didn't tell them about the corners being cut. I didn't mention that I'd seen the revised electrical shutdown schedule and recognized the risk. I didn't say anything that would implicate Webb or damage the company. You protected him, Isabel said. You protected the man responsible for Rosa's death. Yes, Vincent said. I protected him, and in doing so, I protected myself. If I'd admitted I knew about the safety risks and said nothing, I could have faced criminal negligence charges. At minimum, I would have been fired and blacklisted in the industry. So you kept quiet, Isabel said. And what happened to Webb? The company settled the lawsuits out of court for undisclosed amounts, Vincent said. Webb personally made a statement expressing regret for the tragedy and pledging to improve safety protocols. Then he went right back to business. The Mission Rise project was completed on schedule. And you? I worked on the new building, Vincent said. I designed luxury condos that sold for prices Rosa could never have afforded, built on the ground where she died. And I told myself I was honoring her memory by creating something beautiful. The bitterness in his voice was thick enough to choke on. After the building was finished, I quit web development, Vincent continued. Started my own firm with money I'd saved and a small inheritance from my father. I threw myself into work with a manic intensity. Every project was a monument to my guilt. Every building a tombstone. Did you ever try to find me? Isabel asked. Vincent shook his head. No. I told myself it would be better if I stayed away, that I had nothing to offer you, that my guilt would only hurt you more. The truth is, I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done. Until you saw my photo 8 months ago, Isabel said. Until I saw your photo, Vincent confirmed. And even then, I didn't have the courage to approach you honestly. Instead, I manipulated the situation to bring you into my life without having to confess what I'd done. Isabel was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. When she finally spoke, her voice was eerily calm. You know what the worst part is? It's not even that you failed to save Rosa. It's that you've spent 20 years building monuments to your guilt instead of actually doing something meaningful to make amends. Vincent flinched as if she'd struck him. You could have tried to find me, Isabel continued, her voice gaining strength. You could have made sure I was okay, that I had what I needed. You could have funded scholarships for foster kids or donated to deaf education programs in Rosa's name. You could have exposed web safety violations and prevented other tragedies. I did donate, Vincent said weakly. My foundation supports several. Anonymous donations don't count, Isabel cut him off. You did the bare minimum to ease your conscience while making sure your own reputation stayed intact. You built your empire on Rosa's grave and called it success. She stood abruptly. I'm leaving. Tomorrow morning, I'm packing my things and I'm gone. You can find someone else to care for Cameron. No, Vincent said, the word coming out more forcefully than he intended. Please. Not Cameron. Whatever you think of me, whatever I deserve, don't punish him. He needs you. He needs therapy, Isabel said coldly. Professional therapy from someone who isn't connected to his father's guilty conscience. He's had therapy, Vincent said desperately. Years of it. Nothing worked. You're the first person who's been able to reach him. You gave him a voice, Isabel. You did in 3 months what an army of specialists couldn't do in 4 years. Because I understood his silence, Isabel said. Because I knew what it was like to lose everything and retreat into yourself. Because I was the 4-year-old foster kid you abandoned, and I knew how to help another lost child. Don't you see how sick that is? You're using my trauma to fix your son's trauma. I know, Vincent said. I know how wrong it is. But please, Isabel. Don't make Cameron pay for my sins. He's innocent in all of this. Isabel moved toward the door, then stopped. Without turning around, she said, I'll stay until the end of the week. That gives you time to find a replacement and to prepare Cameron. But after that, I'm gone. And I don't ever want to see you again. Isabel. One more thing, she said, cutting him off. Whatever you paid the agency for my placement, whatever you've been paying me monthly, it's not enough. Not nearly enough. Rosa's death, my childhood in foster care, the 20 years you ignored my existence, there's no amount of money that can compensate for that. But I'm going to need funds to relocate, to start over somewhere far from here. Whatever you need, Vincent said immediately. Name your price. Isabel finally turned to look at him, and the expression on her face made Vincent's blood run cold. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something colder, more calculating. I'll let you know, she said. Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. Vincent stood alone in his study, the newspaper clipping still lying on his desk. The headline seemed to glow in the darkness, "Fire Kills 2 in Mission District." He thought confessing would bring relief. Instead, he felt like he was drowning, pulled under by 20 years of accumulated guilt that no amount of success could keep at bay. His phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk about Vincent Calloway. I have information you'll want to hear. Frank Morrison, investigative journalist." Vincent stared at the message, a new kind of dread settling over him. His past wasn't just catching up with him. It was about to go public. The reckoning had only just begun.